Japan and the Shang Dynasty, surprising ancient connections. 6th century BCE. Izumo emerged as a single kingdom. It was not a realm forged by force of arms, but a country bound together by shared faith. At its center stood the Sai no Kami, the god of fortune who lit the lives and hearts of the people. The people of Izumo worshipped the sun. They rose before dawn and, as families, faced the eastern mountains to gaze upon the rising morning sun. The sun goddess Sai-hime no Mikoto is said to descend from the line of Indian solar deities, and later became the prototype of Amaterasu. The sacred numbers they cherished were 3 and 8. These derived from the image of the morning sun, radiating light in 8 directions. Yakumotatsu, Yachi Hoko, Uyashima. We can see echoes of these numbers scattered throughout the myths. There was another indispensable belief, the dragon serpent deity, Naga, a god formed from the Ganges crocodile and the forest cobra. The form of Nagaraja, the great Naga king, resembles the serpent-bodied figures, Fushi and Nuwa, that passed from China to India and back. Both share a lower half like a snake. In Izumo, they made dragons from straw and wound them 8 times around a tree in worship. This tree was called the Sai no Ki, the sacred tree. It was believed the dragon god would climb that tree to ascend to the heavens and then return to the earth. The 8 coils later came to be the origin of the Hachimaki. Even now in Izumo, the dragon god festival continues, and in some villages, the dragon god is called an Kujin or Orochi. Even when not a dragon, snakes were considered sacred worldwide from ancient times. This likely stems from admiration for their repeated shedding of skin, a symbol of rejuvenation and rebirth, and from reverence for their prolific sexuality. Male and female snakes may entwine for many tens of hours during mating. That entwined form is echoed in Izumo's Shimenawa, sacred ropes, and stones shaped like coils, preserving the symbol to the present. Mount Daisen, a conical mountain once called Fire God Peak, Hino Kamadaki. It is said the spirit of Kunato no Okami resides there. And in the Heian period, this Kunato deity came also to be regarded as a protector of cattle and horses. The region developed a cult of cattle and horses. Pilgrims from afar brought offerings, and they drove cattle and horses to carry loads. Because livestock were essential to agriculture and people's livelihoods, worshippers led their animals to Daizenji to receive protective talismans, and they gave the animals the mountain spring water to pray for their longevity. They also affixed the talismans to the posts of cowsheds to continue praying for their safety. Festivals for the Sai no Kami were also held in this area. The networks of parishioners that spread from here became the foundation of the Izumo kingdom. The crest of Izumo Taisha is a hexagonal pattern, not from a turtle shell, but the hexagon of the dragon serpent or snake scales. In the royal family's emblem, within the fish scale pattern of the snake, appears a crossed axing mark on a bronze sword. The axing mark found on a bronze sword excavated at the Kutani site. The shapes of the Kofun burial mounds in the Izumo region are the square tumuli with protruding corners, Yosumi Toshutsugata Kofun, and these too are thought to represent an axing mark when viewed from above, embodying a prayer for regeneration. Rather than the symbol of war, it is an imprint of creation through the union of male and female. This belief breathes through the narratives of the Kojiki and Nihon Shoki. Omononushi, the hair of Inaba, Toyotama Hime. These deities change their forms in the stories, sometimes appearing as crocodiles or snakes. This faith also passed on to Shinshu's Azumino. At Omiwa Shrine on Mount Miwa, the mountain itself is the sacred body of the deity. The triple torii placed within is said in Izumo tradition to mean the 3 gods of Sai no Kami. The legend of Ryuno Kotaro, the child of the rhinoceros dragon of the Izumo clan, and the white dragon king who opened up the Matsumoto Basin, is one such tale. Izumo, Mount Miwa, and Shinshu. Each place has its triple torii. The same faith in the Sai no Kami binds distant lands along these roads. and hidden in the shape of this torii is a narrative connected to Himiko, who ruled around the same period in ancient Japan. The gates of the Shang Yin Dynasty, famous for the origins of Chinese characters, share the same form. Amazingly common threads tie ancient Japan and the Shang culture. Shang, an ancient Chinese dynasty, is a name everyone has heard. The Shang Dynasty is the oldest Chinese dynasty whose existence has been archaeologically confirmed. Also called the Shang, it arose around 1600 BCE in the Central Plains, the middle and lower reaches of the Yellow River. There are various theories about the year of its fall, but the account that it was overthrown by the Zhou around 1046 BCE is the most widely held. The last king, King Zhou, Zhou of Shang, is known as a tyrant rare in history, blamed for bringing about the fall of the state. Shang is also known for its abundant bronze culture. Another notable custom was the use of turtle plastrons for divination, oracle turtle practices. From the Nara period onward, in Japan, the turtle shell divination called Kiboku became mainstream. At the Ikazuchi Shrine on Tsushima in Nagasaki Prefecture, this turtle divination is still practiced today. Now, although Shang was an ancient Chinese dynasty, you might be surprised to learn there are many cultural commonalities with Japan. Let us step through these mysterious connections. First, the religion of the Shang. The royal house of Shang claimed descent from a sun deity and practiced sun worship. The king was a priest king. Political rule and ritual were fully integrated. In other words, the king was a shaman. All political matters were decided by divination, Kiboku. Ancestor worship was also practiced intensely, with ancestors constantly revered and ritualized. One could say that the nation was governed by invisible beings, gods and ancestors. In Japan's Yayoi period, divination was conducted using deer shoulder blades in a rite called futamani. From the Nara period, the turtle plastron divination became prevalent, Kiboku, and is still practiced as ritual today. The plastrons used in Shang divination were inscribed with characters. The cracks formed when they were burned were read for omens. In Japan, they did not generally inscribe characters, but read meaning from the way the cracks fell, a more primitive form suggesting that the divination was not something imported wholesale from China. After Shang, later Chinese dynasties certainly continued rituals, but they did not determine all affairs by divination. From the Zhou dynasty on, a Confucian emphasis on moral conduct and the development of ritsuro, law codes and administrative systems, took hold. In short, the civilization of Shang was fundamentally different from later Chinese civilization. On the other hand, Japan shows some curious continuities. Shinto's supreme deity is the sun goddess Amaterasu. The country calls itself the Land of the Rising Sun, and sun worship has continued from antiquity to the present. Ancestor worship also remains strong. The Weiji, records of the Wa, tell us that in Yamatai the shaman queen Himiko ruled as a ritual sovereign and decided many matters through rites, a picture that echoes the Shang king. As noted above, the method of Shang divination involved inscribing questions on turtle plastrons or animal shoulder bones, driving heated metal rods into them, and reading the cracks. In Yayoi, Japan, a similar practice used deer shoulder blades, futamani, and in the Nara period, turtle shell divination, kikoku, became common. In China, the practice declined from the Zhou period and disappeared entirely by the Tang Dynasty. Remarkably, in Japan, this practice survives as a routine part of imperial and shrine rites. At the enthronement rituals of the recent emperor, for example, the Daijosai used Kiboku to determine the selection of Satan, sacred rice fields, for the ceremony. The Ikazuchi Shrine in Tsushima still holds an annual Kiboku ritual to divine fortune and misfortune. In China, this practice had already ceased over 1,500 years before and become a matter for archaeology. Yet in Japan, it remains a living tradition. Why then has so much of Shang culture remained so vividly in Japan? Let us look at the mystery surrounding the founding of the Shang Dynasty. Contrary to the common belief that Chinese history is the history of the Han people in the Central Plains, the Yellow River civilization, the reality is more complex. We now know that the Yangtze civilization is at least as ancient. Moreover, the kings who ruled the Yellow River area after Shang, the Zhou dynasty, supposedly the first Han-led dynasty, may themselves have been founded by non-Han, Western Yi peoples. The Shang Dynasty was established not by Han people, but by peoples known to later historians as the Dongyi, Eastern Barbarians. The term Dongyi was coined in the Han era to refer generally to non-Han peoples living east of the Central Plains, and it carried the connotation of barbarians. In short, Shang rulers were not originally the settled peoples of the Central Plains, but came from the east. Why then do so many think of Chinese history as Han history? Part of it is political and demographic. Han peoples dominate present-day China and would prefer the nation's history to be their own. Shang's existence remained largely legendary until archaeological confirmation in the 20th century. Only recently have scholars come to see that the Yin founders were not Central Plains Han. Some theories even suggest the Zhou were founded by Western non-Han peoples. According to historical records, Shang was founded when Tianyi overthrew Xia. The Xia dynasty itself has not been firmly established archaeologically, yet the historical texts assert its existence. If Xia did exist, it too may have been an Eastern Yi dynasty like the later Shang. So who were the Dongyi? The Dongyi was a general term for barbarians east of the Central Plains, including the Korean Peninsula and the Japanese archipelago. But in earlier times, it likely referred more specifically to peoples around Shandong on the Chinese mainland. They were broadly a maritime trading people. The word Shang itself, the dynasty's other name, stems from these people's aptitude for trade. The term Shangren, merchant, is born of this mercantile tradition. To facilitate trade, the Shang used the region's first money, shell money, called baika. The shell used was the cowrie, takaragai, whose primary source lay not in the Chinese mainland, but in Japan's southwestern islands. From Okinawa to the Amami Islands. The widespread use of cowrie shells as currency in Shang shows that its founders had lively exchanges with the Ryukyu region. The frequent use of turtle plastrons in their divination rites further confirms maritime trade connections. When the Shang dynasty came into being, Japan was in the late Jomon period. People inhabiting the Southwest Islands and Kyushu are also called Jomon. But Jomon people were not culturally uniform. Early Jomon cultures, especially those flourishing in southern Kyushu in the formative and early phases, differed markedly from later Jomon culture. Jomon pottery broadly includes a range of styles: shell-impressed patterns, cord-marked impressions made with spatulas or combs, plainwares, etc. In southern Kyushu, shell-impressed pottery is common. At the Uenohara site in Kagoshima Prefecture, for example, excavated pottery shows shell-impressed designs, flat bottoms, and even rectangular forms, very different from Eastern Jomon wares, and dates back to some of the oldest pottery traditions, perhaps up to 10,000 years ago. Similar cord-marked pottery with Jomon-like features has been found on the Chinese side of the East China Sea. For instance, at Xianren Cave in Wanyan County, Jiangxi Province, archaeologists unearthed round-bottomed pottery with coarse cord markings. The site has yielded pottery shards thought to be among the oldest in China, perhaps nearly 20,000 years old, with perforated circular patterns on the surface that closely resemble pottery from the Ato Shell Mound in Miyazaki Prefecture. From this, we can infer that the people who made the oldest pottery on both sides of the East China Sea belonged to a single cultural sphere. 20,000 years ago, during the last glacial maximum, sea levels were far lower and much of the East China Sea was land. The first potters likely lived on that now submerged landmass. In that era, Western Japan was separated from the continent, but the submerged land of the East China Sea was very close. People with the same cultural repertoire lived across that region. Thus, the Dongyi who built the Xia and Shang dynasties and the Jomon people of Western Japan likely shared common ancestors. The people of the East China Sea landmass, the Proto-Jomon, who later became dispersed by rising seas. In old usage, the Han people called the peoples of Western Japan Wajin, Wa. But in ancient times, the term Wa seems to have referred more loosely to a cultural zone around the East China Sea with commonalities in language and customs. A manuscript called the Kaiten Kodan, a document discovered in the Russo-Japanese War period, even contains the phrase Shang Yin is Wa, noting that a wide region of East Asia had peoples who shared a common language. Unfortunately, mainstream historians regard that manuscript as a forgery and generally ignore it, but there is no definitive proof that it is forged. It contains content that aligns with observable facts, so dismissing it outright may be unjustified. Some Chinese speakers pronounce Japanese unusually well. Some of the best mimicry comes from people from Shanghai. Shanghainese pronunciation, they say, is closer to Japanese than to Standard Mandarin. Thus, some Shanghai natives find Japanese phonology easy and quickly adapt. It's possible that the roots of Japanese and Shanghainese reflect traces of the Proto-Jomon language. What did Japan inherit from Shang? Shang fell around 1046 BCE. What was happening in Japan at that time? The Yayoi period had begun. Perhaps the people of Shang, forced by other non-Han peoples, fled en masse to Western Japan. For those who shared cultural roots with the Jomon of Western Japan, Japan would have been an ideal refuge. The Weiji's description of the Wa and of Yamatai shows strong Shang influence on Yayoi Japan. The Weiji records women participating in politics among the Wa. The Confederation of Yamatai was led by the female ruler Himiko. Surprisingly, in Yin, two female priestesses wielded considerable authority and participated in governance by means of ritual. Moreover, the Weiji's mention of the Wano-Mizu Hito, Wa's seafaring people, indicates Wa were maritime folk who tattooed themselves, bunshin, as shark amulets, a custom also common among Chinese minority groups along the East China Sea. Tattooing is thus another shared feature between Yamatai, the Wa, and the Emishi. In Shang, sacrificial rites and retainer burial were practiced. Animals and conquered peoples were offered as votive sacrifices, and upon the death of a noble, retainers, servants, and wives were sometimes killed and buried alongside, a widespread custom in Shang. Japan does not show large-scale human sacrifice, but forms of human offerings did occur. The Weiji records that upon Himiko's death, more than 100 servants were buried with her. These similarities suggest Yayoi culture was strongly influenced by Shang. The practice of retainer burial is also characteristic of long-distance maritime peoples. The Sea people, who later helped Shufu reach Japan, are said to have already settled here earlier, suggesting a continuity of maritime culture from the Jomon. The mysteries of the rituals and customs that trace back from the Sai-no-Kami legends show how culture and custom are linked. The Indus civilization, the Shang Dynasty, and the Izumo Kingdom all used pictographic or symbol-based scripts. The Indus script, Shang Oracle Bone script, and Izumo script to transmit cultural knowledge. For wide-ranging maritime traders, these centers of literacy likely served as special places to learn the languages needed for trade. Another key point, the Weiji lists silk as a product of Wa. Although silk's origins are attributed to China and its production techniques were state secrets, silk production appears in Yayoi, Japan. While some suggest silk making was transmitted via ships between the Amami Islands and the Chinese missions to Tang, it seems unlikely that the secret of silk was casually handed over by envoys. A more natural explanation is that the Proto-Jomon of the now submerged East China Sea either invented sericulture or already had the techniques that spread to both Japan and the Chinese mainland. The name Shang itself, the merchants adept at trade, gave rise to the word for merchant, Shangren. Genetic analyses further back up these connections. The Han's dominant Y chromosome is haplogroup O2. Meanwhile, the D1 lineage, found among the Japanese, Tibetans, Qiang, Yi, Yao, the Andaman Islanders, Mactan Islanders, Guam Islanders, and others, points to a completely different root from the Han. This group likely spread across the East China Sea during the last glacial maximum. As the Ice Age ended and sea levels rose, parts of the population became stranded on islands like Japan, while others remained on the continent. So, ancient Japan and Shang were separate polities across the sea, yet they shared a common cultural source: a maritime people who worshipped the sun, revered ancestors, and governed through divination. That collective memory of the seafaring peoples lives on in our time. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story stirred something within you, we invite you to subscribe, share your thoughts, and walk with us as we continue to uncover hidden threads in the fabric of human history.